Hey folks, it's Monday. Welcome to the Daily Dose. So glad you tuned in. This week, we're going to talk about enemies of the heart. There are four emotions we believe that grab a hold of our heart, that get lodged in our heart, and they create all kinds of havoc in our lives. And so we're going to talk about that this week on the Daily Dose. But before we do, would you do something for me? If you're watching on Facebook, would you like this post? Would you share it? If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. Hit the little bell so you get notifications. If you're watching at home on cable access, tell somebody. Would you tell somebody? Share with them the Daily Dose so they can enjoy and grow in faith, just like you and me. Hey, when my dad was of retirement age, he went into the hospital for a routine checkup with his doctor, and he found out, get this, that he had a damaged heart. And that he had had a damaged heart all of his life. He had had, likely, a hole between two chambers of his heart that had, in some way or another, limited his life. What he found out is that life was harder for him with a damaged heart. This week, we want to talk about how we all know this is true. We all experience heart damage. You know this. When you were in elementary school or middle school, maybe you got that nickname that was kind of funny, but it actually kind of hurt. Or maybe in your family you experienced or your family experienced abuse. Maybe as a kid you watched your parents fight all the time and they probably should have gotten a divorce, or maybe they did get a divorce. Or maybe you were hurt as a child, but you didn't have those adult figures in your life to help you make sense of it all. You see, we all, every last one of us, we have heart damage. And this week, we're going to tend to that heart damage. Because if we don't, here's what we know. That stuff gets lodged in our hearts. And it wreaks all kinds of havoc in the relationships we have with those around us. Well, Jesus knew this. Jesus knew this. In Matthew chapter 15, Jesus writes about how religious people, they got all concerned about the things that we put into our mouth, the things that people would eat way back in the ancient world, because there were all these laws about what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat. And Jesus talks about how it's not what you put in your mouth that matters, it's what comes out of your mouth that has the power to really hurt people. In Matthew chapter 15, we hear these words. Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of a person's mouth, get this, come from the heart. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what defile a person, but eating with unwashed hands does not defile them. You see, what Jesus knew is that what comes out of us gives us a glimpse of our hearts. Why does Jesus know this? Well, you know this. Hurt people hurt people. Does that make sense? Hurt people hurt people. My wife and I, we lived in Minneapolis, just a couple minutes from downtown Minneapolis. And one of the things I always marveled at was the intricate system of highways that went through downtown Minneapolis. And I always wanted to take a helicopter over downtown Minneapolis and see this sort of spaghetti bowl of highways and how they were designed for efficiency. But here's what we figured out. Is that we would not go through downtown Minneapolis between the hours of 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock. Why? Because we would get stuck. A 20-minute trip would end up taking us an hour and a half. You see, those highways through downtown Minneapolis are sort of like our hearts. Our hearts are a hub for every experience we have. And here's what we know, good or bad, those experiences have to go through our heart. But there's a problem. The bad experiences, those hurtful experiences, they have this way of getting lodged in our hearts. And they just get stuck there. Those wounds, those scars, those pains, those hurts, they get lodged in our hearts. I mean, you know this. You've got those nicknames you were called when you were a little kid, Bucktooth, Or maybe it was 4 eyes. Or maybe when you were a kid, your parents just didn't give you the sort of affirmation that you deserved, and it got lodged in your heart. For me, as a kid, we moved around all the time. We were always moving. About every 3 to 5 years, we'd move to a new town. And I gotta tell you, I hated being the new kid all the time, because everyone looked at you strangely, and all that I wanted was to simply be somewhere where I fit in, where I wasn't the outsider. And that affected my heart. You see, these things affect our hearts, and we hold them inside, and we develop these protective mechanisms. We have unresolved hurt that builds walls, and here's what it does. It comes out sideways. And as adults, it has this way of eroding our relationships. The other thing it does, strangely, is it also has a way of eroding our faith. Because we're always sort of looking at God and saying, what in the world? How could I have had to go through that? How could my loved one had to have gone through that? I have a family member who I'm really close to experienced abuse as a kid. He wants nothing to do with the church, because he looks at me and says, how could this God of love allow something like that to happen to me? And so this week, folks, we're going to talk about 4 enemies. 4 enemies that get lodged in our hearts. And they have this way of poisoning our relationships all of the days of our lives, our relationships with the people we love and with God. You see, those 4 enemies are this: guilt, anger, greed, and jealousy. I hope you'll tune in all week long as we wrestle with the enemies of the heart.
She was his wife, just trying to make the world a little better, shine a light. People started talking just to hear their own voice. Those people tried to accuse my father, said he made their own choice. Though it might be painful, the time will always tell. Those people have long since gone, profiling their faith. Even when the rain falls, even when the flood starts rising, even when the storm comes, I am washed by the water. Even when the rain falls, even when the flood starts rising, even when the storm comes, I am washed by the water. Even when the earth crumbles under my feet, even when the ones I love turn around and crucify me, I won't ever, ever let you down. Oh, 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 oh. flood starts rising, even when the storm comes, I am washed by the water, even when the rain falls, even when the flood starts rising, even when the storm comes, I am washed by the water, even when the earth crumbles under my feet, even when the ones I love turn around and crucify me, I won't ever, ever let you down. I won't fall as long as you're around me, even when the rain falls, even when the flood starts rising, even when the storm comes, I am washed by the water, even when the rain falls, even when the flood starts rising, even when the storm comes.